When a journalist mocked Barron Trump, no one expected his calm response to steal the show. No one in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Grand Hotel could have predicted what was about to happen. The night was set to be one of elegance, charity, and high society, yet it quickly turned into an unforgettable spectacle. The glow of crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a golden hue, their light bouncing off the polished marble floors. The air buzzed with an undercurrent of excitement as guests arrived in their finest attire, tailored suits, flowing evening gowns, and sparkling jewelry that caught the light with every graceful movement. Seated at tables adorned with pristine white tablecloths and delicate floral centerpieces were some of the nation's most powerful and influential figures: business tycoons, renowned actors, respected journalists, and political elites. They had all gathered for one purpose: to support a foundation dedicated to uplifting underprivileged youth. This was not just another high-profile event. It was a night meant to inspire, a moment meant to make a difference. But beneath the dazzling spectacle of wealth and philanthropy, there was another layer: a quiet, almost electric anticipation. Everyone knew that the evening's keynote speaker was about to take the stage, and with their reputation for bold, unapologetic takes, it was bound to be a speech to remember. Barron Trump, the unintentional standout. Tucked away in a less conspicuous corner, away from the prying eyes of cameras and flashing bulbs, sat Barron Trump. At just 18 years old, his presence wasn't one of loud dominance, but rather of quiet strength. His tall, imposing frame made him stand out naturally, yet he made no effort to be the center of attention. Invited by a close family friend, he was simply here to experience a different social circle, one outside the political sphere he had grown up in. Unlike many of the high-profile guests who thrived under the spotlight, Barron appeared perfectly at ease in the background. His piercing blue eyes calmly swept across the room, his expression unreadable, his demeanor composed. It was a quiet confidence, one that many mistook for indifference, but those who truly paid attention could sense there was something deeper there. The gala proceeded as expected, with smooth precision. A string quartet played a delicate symphony in the background, while waiters glided through the room like shadows, offering trays of exquisite hors d'oeuvres and fine champagne. Light-hearted conversations filled the air, accompanied by the occasional burst of laughter. It was a scene straight out of a luxurious fairy tale. But as the night progressed, one thing became evident. The speech was what everyone was waiting for. It was the moment that would either inspire or stir controversy. The journalist takes the stage, and the atmosphere shifts. The keynote speaker for the evening, a well-known journalist in liberal media circles, had been announced weeks in advance. Their reputation preceded them, a figure celebrated for their sharp wit, unfiltered opinions, and fearless critiques. Loved by some, disliked by others, they were no stranger to controversy. But tonight, they had promised to challenge perspectives and ignite meaningful discourse. As the MC introduced them, a noticeable change swept through the room. The soft murmurs of conversation faded. Glasses were set down. Postures shifted. All eyes turned toward the stage. Even Barron, who had remained still and composed all evening, leaned back slightly, his gaze locked onto the unfolding scene. With a confident stride, the journalist took their place at the podium, a charming, almost knowing smile stretching across their face. Clad in a sleek black suit, they radiated charisma, the kind that had earned them both admiration and criticism throughout their career. The audience responded with polite applause, yet there was an undeniable edge of expectation in the air. Would they push the boundaries tonight? Would they cross the line as they so often did? The speech begins, a slow build to tension. The journalists started lightheartedly, their tone conversational, laced with charm and humor. They joked about the city's infamous traffic jams, threw in a playful story about a past gala mishap, something about an entire champagne tower crashing down. The audience chuckled, some even laughing openly, allowing the tension in the room to ease. For a brief moment, the night felt like any other high-profile gathering, polished, predictable, and harmless. But then, the shift came. What started as general cultural and political observations soon took a more pointed turn. The journalist began dissecting well-known figures, poking fun at their quirks, missteps, and policies. Some of the audience members laughed along, nodding in agreement, while others exchanged wary glances, their smiles growing tighter. Then the focus landed squarely on Donald Trump. Well, we can't possibly discuss the state of the world without mentioning the man who made orange the new black, the journalist quipped, their voice dripping with sarcasm. Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. Love him or hate him, you have to admit, he's the gift that keeps on giving for people like me. The reaction was mixed. Some guests laughed freely, while others shuffled in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. But one person remained completely still, Barron Trump. Barron's reaction, unshaken and unreadable. As the journalist continued, the jabs became sharper, the remarks more direct. They mocked Trump's policies, his tweets, his public appearances, all with the same biting wit that had made them famous. But something changed in the room. The laughter began to thin out, slowly replaced by a growing sense of unease. What had started as light-hearted banter now felt pointed. The energy in the ballroom shifted once again, and even those who had laughed before now seemed hesitant. Yet, through it all, Barron remained still. His expression was unreadable, his posture relaxed. If the journalist had noticed him, they didn't show it, at least not yet. And then the journalist delivered their final punchline. And of course, they said, pausing dramatically, we can't forget his most overlooked legacy. The room held its breath. What came next would change the entire tone of the evening. To be continued. Next generation? Let's talk about Barron. But no one was ready for what happened next. A collective gasp rippled through the grand ballroom. It was as if a sudden chill had swept across the room, freezing everyone in place. Heads turned, eyes widening in unison, as they all landed on Barron Trump, the young man who, until that very moment, had been content to remain in the background. The journalist, still standing at the podium, maintained a playful tone, but there was an undeniable bite in their words. I mean, let's talk about Barron, they quipped, their smirk growing. A sharp tension sliced through the air. Barron, now the unwilling center of attention, sat motionless, his expression unreadable. Imagine growing up in a golden tower, surrounded by marble everything, while the rest of us struggle to survive Monday mornings. And all while your dad is tweeting about Kofefi. I mean, that must have been character building, huh? A few nervous chuckles broke the silence, but they were isolated, hesitant, the kind of laughter that wasn't really laughter at all. The joke had landed, but not in the way the journalist had intended. Most of the audience simply sat there, frozen, their discomfort palpable. It was as if the entire room had suddenly realized that the line had not just been crossed, it had been obliterated. The spotlight, unasked for and unwelcome, had landed squarely on Barron Trump. But instead of crumbling under the pressure of the moment, instead of reacting emotionally, Barron remained unshaken. His composure was unbreakable, and what he would do next would leave everyone in the room stunned. The power of silence, Barron's unshaken presence. The room held its collective breath. Every gaze in the ballroom was locked onto one person, a young man who had been thrust into the spotlight without warning. The journalist's words still lingered in the air, heavy and cutting, waiting for a reaction. But Barron didn't give them one. He didn't flinch. He didn't shift in his chair. He didn't even glance around nervously, like one might expect from an 18-year-old being mocked on a stage in front of the nation's elite. Instead, he sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable, his hands resting lightly on the table. But the real power in that moment wasn't in what Barron did. It was in what he didn't do. The silence in the room grew louder with each passing second. A few attendees exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort spreading like wildfire. Even the journalist, who had built a career on quick-witted confidence, seemed to sense the shift. Their once playful smirk faltered, just slightly, as they glanced toward Barron's table. Maybe they had expected a forced laugh from him, maybe a shrug, or even a sarcastic retort. But this quiet defiance, this unwavering stillness, this was something else entirely. There was no indifference in Barron's posture, no attempt to pretend he hadn't heard, no act of tuning out the world around him. His presence, once subtle and unassuming, now seemed larger than life. It was as if the entire room had suddenly realized the weight of what had just been said. Even those who had laughed before now sat stone-faced, their smiles long gone. Barron's silence was not a lack of words. It was a statement in itself. I hear you. I see you. And I am not moved. A low murmur broke the tension, someone near the stage whispering to their companion. The journalist, now visibly shifting their stance, cleared their throat, a desperate attempt to regain control of the moment. Tough crowd, they muttered into the microphone, forcing a nervous laugh. But this time, no one laughed along. The tension thickened, wrapping itself around the ballroom like an invisible fog. And then, Barron moved. Slowly, deliberately. The soft scrape of his chair against the polished floor was the only sound in the room. At just over 6 feet tall, Barron was already an imposing figure, but it wasn't his height that commanded attention. It was the unshakable maturity in his posture. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He simply stood, his gaze sweeping across the room before finally settling on the journalist. Barron Trump didn't need to speak yet. His presence alone demanded attention. Even the faint whispers at the back of the room faded into nothing. The journalist, who had been so bold just moments ago, now stood motionless, their earlier confidence evaporating with each step Barron took toward the stage. The audience watched, wide-eyed, breathless, trapped between anticipation and disbelief. What was he going to do? What was he going to say? One thing was certain. Barron Trump was about to own this moment. Barron speaks, and no one was ready for it. As Barron reached the edge of the stage, the crowd's collective gaze followed him. The tension in the room had reached its breaking point, every second feeling like an eternity. He stopped just a few feet away from the podium.
Tall, composed,
unwavering. And then, finally, he spoke. His voice was steady, deliberate, cutting through the silence like a blade. Thank you for your insight. The journalist's breath hitched. The audience?
stunned.
There was no anger in his voice, no mocking retort, no outburst. Just an unshakable calm, an eerie sense of control that seemed far beyond his years. I've grown up watching people make assumptions about me, my family, and my life, Barron continued, his gaze locked onto the journalist. It's almost become a game to some, a way to fill in the gaps when you don't know the full story. And I get it. We're public figures. It comes with the territory. The room was silent.
Completely, utterly, silent.
Even those who had quietly laughed earlier now sat motionless, their expressions shifting from amusement to something else entirely. But Barron wasn't finished. He took a step closer, his voice now carrying a quiet intensity. But there's something important that often gets overlooked. The weight of his words hung in the air, and everyone in the ballroom could feel it. Barron Trump had just turned the tables. And no one saw it coming. To be continued. Barron Trump just shocked the world. And no one saw it coming. The room was silent. No more murmurs. No nervous chuckles. Just stunned, breathless silence. Barron Trump stood tall, his words still hanging in the air like an echo refusing to fade. And then, with a voice as steady as his presence, he delivered a truth that no one could ignore. Behind every punchline, there's a human being. Someone with their own struggles, their own dreams, and their own story. The journalist, still gripping the edge of the podium, suddenly looked different. The bravado had drained from their face. They weren't being attacked. They were being confronted with a mirror, a reflection of the weight their words carried. You may think you know me because of who my father is, Barron continued, his voice calm but firm. But you don't.
Not really.
The truth in those words hit harder than any comeback ever could. The crowd, once buzzing with laughter, now sat frozen in realization. The joke, so effortless just moments ago, was now an uncomfortable reminder of how easy it is to dehumanize someone you don't truly know. Respect shouldn't have to be earned. Barron's lesson to the world. Barron let a pause stretch between his words. Not for drama, not for effect, but because he understood the power of silence. And then, with quiet conviction, he spoke again. "What I've learned," he said, his eyes scanning the audience, "is that respect shouldn't have to be earned. It should be given freely, especially when you don't know someone's story." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, but this time, they weren't whispers of mockery. They were whispers of understanding. The journalist's expression shifted. They had walked onto that stage expecting to control the room.
But now?
Now they were just another spectator, watching as Barron Trump redefined the moment. But Barron wasn't finished. Turning slightly, he addressed the entire audience, not just the journalist anymore. "We live in a time where it's so easy to tear each other down," he said, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable gravity. "Words have power. They can hurt, or they can heal. They can divide, or they can unite. And I think we could all use a little more of the latter." The weight of his words settled over the room. The audience wasn't just listening anymore. They were absorbing, understanding, feeling. And in that moment, it became clear this wasn't just about one comment, one joke, or one exchange. This was about something much bigger. Something universal. Something that transcended politics, last names, and headlines. It was about the power of choosing respect, even when it isn't given to you. The walk back, and the standing ovation that no one expected. Barron took a step back. He let his gaze settle on the journalist one final time. Not with anger, not with condescension, but with a quiet strength that spoke louder than any insult ever could. "I hope this gives you something to think about." The room remained frozen. Even the journalist, who had once commanded the stage with effortless confidence, now stood speechless, their earlier bravado completely dissolved. And then, Barron turned. He walked back to his seat, the soft clicks of his shoes against the polished floor the only sound in the vast ballroom. No one moved. No one spoke. And then it happened. Somewhere near the front, a single person began clapping. Then another.
And another.
And before anyone even realized what was happening, the entire ballroom was on its feet. A thunderous standing ovation. The applause erupted, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Some clapped in admiration. Others clapped out of redemption, as if trying to undo the discomfort of their earlier laughter. Even the journalist attempted a smile, but it was clear this moment no longer belonged to them. It belonged to Barron. And yet, back at his table, he didn't bask in the applause. He didn't revel in the attention. He simply sat down, his composure unshaken, offering only a polite nod to the attendees around him. This wasn't humility. This wasn't shyness. This was the quiet assurance of someone who had said exactly what needed to be said. The viral explosion. The moment that took over the internet. Within hours, snippets of Barron's speech were flooding social media. Attendees, some discreetly recording on their phones, had captured history.
And now?
The footage was spreading like wildfire.
Twitter.
Instagram.
TikTok.
Everywhere, the same message echoed. Small blue diamond, Barron Trump just schooled an entire room on class and respect. Small blue diamond, no matter what you think of his family, this young man just gave us all something to think about. Small blue diamond, this is how you handle disrespect, with dignity. By the next morning, news outlets picked up the story. Some praised Barron for his maturity, calling it a defining moment in the life of someone who had spent years in the shadow of public scrutiny. Others debated the journalist's remarks. Should public figures, especially young ones, ever be fair game for jokes? The journalist, now facing mounting criticism, released a public statement. Comedy and commentary are powerful tools, but they must be wielded responsibly. Last night, I crossed a line, and I apologized to Barron Trump for my remarks. But not everyone was ready to accept that apology. Talk shows,
Podcasts.
online forums. The debates raged on. Some saw Barron's speech as a long overdue call for civility. Others saw it as a poignant reminder that even public figures, even those with powerful last names, are still human beings. But for Barron, the frenzy of attention meant nothing. He simply returned to his daily life, carrying himself with the same quiet dignity that had defined his response at the gala. While the world argued about the moment, Barron had already moved on. A lesson that echoed far beyond that room. But while Barron moved on, the lesson from that night lingered. Parents shared the speech with their children. Teachers used it in classrooms, a conversation starter about respect, empathy, and grace under fire. Because in a world obsessed with outrage, division, and instant reactions, Barron Trump had done something radically different. He chose to rise above. He reminded us all that dignity is a choice. And sometimes, the most powerful response is one that doesn't tear others down but lifts everyone up.